Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. For today's video, we're going to be talking about this recent breakdown in Bitcoin and analyzing whether this is actually going to be a breakdown or whether this is actually a bear trap. There is a lot of very important things at play with Bitcoin. There is a very real potential that this could be a head and shoulder top that is forming, and if we are to break down where we're at right now, this is the last line of defense that the bulls have before we end up seeing a much larger sell-off ensue. So I've got some very important things to share with you guys. So make sure you stay all the way to the end so you don't miss out, because I know that this is going to help so many of you that have been asking me a lot of these questions. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, now here we are to start off today's video, and this is going to be a very important one because so many people are screaming bear and so many people are rushing to begin selling right now, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that we just recently had this big sell-off. Now here's the thing that we have to consider as we're still in this consolidation, as we haven't really had any sort of confirmation yet. We did finally get that move to the downside that we were watching, whether we were going to end up holding support here at about 26,670 or whether we were going to end up breaking back down below it. Now the thing is, even though we have sold back down, we're ending up retesting the low end of these wicks. And this was kind of the low end that we hit during the initial sell-off as we ended up bottoming basically about May 12th. Now we went through this entire consolidation, and even though we're selling off from this support at 26,700 and we're retesting the low end of this wick, we could still end up holding as support right here. And so we don't have any true confirmation, even though we are technically below our support that we're watching and the short-term trend is bearish. If we were to see a strong buyback from this range, and for the market to end up holding and reclaiming this as support, then in my opinion that is equally as bullish as for us to just continue to hold up there. And it could actually point that this is a true double bottom formation. Now, at least in the short term, if we were to see that, everything is depending on what happens with the S&P 500. But if Bitcoin's able to see a strong buyback in here, this consolidation will look identical to a lot of the double bottom formations that we've actually seen throughout Bitcoin's price history. Now, if you guys don't know what I'm talking about this double bottom right here. We've seen a number of the markets make this. Ethereum did it in its very first bear market. Bitcoin did it all the way back in 2015. And this is a potential that we can definitely be watching to follow, considering the fact anytime we have this sort of a breakdown where we see this massive spill and it leads in this sort of a buyback where there's just a ton of sell pressure that goes on. But notice how in this wick, the buyers bought this all the way back up, and we went up almost $1,000 and actually about $2,000 in the entirety of the candle. Now inside of this secondary sell-off right here, it's very similar to what we saw in 2015, or if you look at Ethereum's bear market in 2018 as well, where we see this exact same sort of consolidation here, where we end up making this mid-range point and we hold that mid-range point for a while. And this is the tricky thing about this consolidation, is the fact that we end up holding the support for so long, and even though we end up getting this secondary breakdown, this is the one where most people capitulate. And I see a lot of people kind of doing the same thing right now. Now, even though we've been inside of this major consolidation for a long time, it does look very ugly. And the reason it looks so ugly is because what we're staring at is basically a big head and shoulder formation, right? And so we've been talking about that. And if we ended up seeing a breakdown from this level, what was that going to end up targeting? And so if we end up not holding support, if the bulls are unable to make a strong buyback, because keep in mind, if we're going to see a double bottom in the same way that it happened in this consolidation, we have to see an immediate buyback. And like we said in the first of the video, everything around Bitcoin holding support is going to rely on the S&P 500. And that's kind of what we're seeing thus far in the short term. We did see in the last couple days this big sell-off. We ended up coming all the way back down and retesting the same descending resistance that we broke from. And this is kind of what we've been talking about for a while now. In the big picture for the S&P 500, we know that we've already broken from our major descending resistance. This is our long-term bear market downtrend. And we broke from that right here. We retested it as support right here. And now this secondary move that we've seen was us retesting the same move that we saw out of us breaking out of our entire bear market, being the high at about 41, or I should say 4,200. And we've been sitting here consolidating right at that exact same range high for basically a month now. And so most recently we did see a breakout from that but then we instantly sold off over the last 24 hours, retested that as support. And so we're not really in any sort of true area of confirmation. We're in the mid-range point. We have retested the mid-range point, and we are actually looking like we're holding it as support. So if we were to see a continuation from this trend, like we talked about in my prior updates, then we're going to be looking at a target of about 43.24. Up to this point, we've done everything that we needed to see for us to end up seeing a big breakout. And that's why I say that we're in tricky territory, because when we're looking at Bitcoin, Bitcoin looks ugly. Bitcoin looks like we could have just broken down from this head and shoulder top. If we were to see a head and shoulder top breakdown, our target's going to be 22,000, and the 618 of this entire move up is actually going to be 21,500, right? So we would be looking at a massive drop all the way back down to basically this area right here, and that would catch a lot of people off guard. Now, I think that that's what most people are expecting. But the problem is we haven't truly broken down from support until we end up seeing a much deeper move, which if we end up seeing that move happen, in my opinion, we're going to 24,000 first. I don't think that we're going to go to 25,000 and then just kind of hold that support right off the bat. Because keep in mind, guys, that this is a big long-term consolidation of over a month that we've spent in here. So for us to break down from this, for us to confirm a breakdown and continue down from the support, then I think that that's going to get at a low end 24K, but I think that that's going to take us all the way back down to the 618. That's the bearish scenario, right? Now, as it stands, if we're looking here in the short term, we have the very real potential where this ends up holding as support. The only real potential that this holds support has to do with what the S&P 500 does. If the S&P 500 is unable to hold this mid-range point, if we're unable to see a true breakout from this, then the S&P 500 is going to end up seeing a bigger correction as well. And we could see this thing pull back, maybe all the way back down to the low end of this descending resistance. Maybe we come all the way back down and retest that again, and even make a lower low from the one that we just experienced back here in March. If that were to happen, then that really wouldn't surprise me for us to see a big long-term correction for Bitcoin, where Bitcoin pulls all the way back to the 618, and maybe we even go through a longer period of consolidation than that. It's really hard to say, but the thing that I'm watching right now has everything to do with the fact that we did break out of this 25K level. So if we're going to end up retesting that, we have to hold his support right where we're at. But if we are to see this outcome play out, we have to end up seeing a retest similar to this, where we come all the way back up, we reclaim this mid-range point, and then that sets us up for a bigger buyback, where we'd be running all the way back up to the range highs being about $29,000. So that's what I'm watching for in the short term. Now, if you guys remember in my last update, what we talked about was for the dollar to break out, run upwards of this mid-range point at about 103.5, and then for us to actually pull back and kind of set in our first higher high, and that would build a foundation for us to complete this ABC correction. Now, as you guys can tell, we went up to the mid-range point, but we pulled back, retested it, and then we've actually seen continuation. So as it stands, the dollar is looking very bullish. All of that is because the S&P 500 is pulled back. We've seen Bitcoin pull back as well. And so with the dollar, if this thing is actually going to end up making this C leg much quicker, and we're not going to end up seeing any sort of a quick pullback like I was initially anticipating, then we could end up seeing the dollar running all the way up here to about 108 and 109 and actually completing this ABC correction in a much quicker fashion, which is what would be expected in your general ABC correction, because inside of wave C, they happen much quicker and they are much more of an impulsive type of correction. And so if we are to see that right now, we would expect to see Bitcoin break down from this head and shoulder top, and then we would expect to see Bitcoin probably go all the way back down to this 618. That would complete an entire impulse, and that would be the first completion of an impulse that we've seen to begin this new bull cycle. And so in the same way that 2019 led to this long-term consolidation, I believe that if this is actually a cycle top and the first cycle top of our Elliott wave cycle, then we are going to see some sort of lengthy period of reaccumulation. I don't think it's going to probably end up being quite as long as this one, but I don't think it's going to be that far off at the same time. The only difference between these two has been the impulse being as parabolic. We haven't seen us go all the way up to the 618, which is why I say that we might not end up seeing it end up being so long of a consolidation, because we had a much bigger move off of the lows in 2019. This hasn't been quite the same type of an impulse, so we're not going to expect to see the same large type of a sell-off to the downside. To me, if we are to see a breakdown from right here where we're at, then we're going to hit the 618. We might bounce around here for a little bit, but either way, I think that that's going to end up leading us to that next leg up. And for us to end up coming all the way back up to the 618 being 48,500, it might just end up taking us a lot longer period of time in shorter impulses, right? Because keep in mind, guys, that what we've been looking at has been the potential of us completing this 2019 type of fractal, and it doesn't have to play out in that sort of way. And up to this point, if we were to continue to see a breakdown from where we're at, if we're to continue to see the S&P 500, unable to hold this breakout and actually for us to make a lower low, and the dollar to make this ABC correction and finish it in one go, then at that point we would expect to see Bitcoin go through a lengthier period of consolidation. The only difference here has been this impulse was much shorter than this one, and that's why I don't think that the period of reaccumulation would be quite as long. I still think that we would go through, maybe 3 months, maybe even more than that, potentially even 6 months before we were at the point of us actually breaking out again. But I don't think it changes anything really, because all we have to go off of is all of our prior cycles. And it could end up behaving a little bit more similar to this cycle here, where we end up making these higher highs and higher lows, right? These impulses, and then we go through all of this consolidation, these impulses, but then we're always kind of consolidating and reaccumulating, and we're building a foundation before that sort of parabolic breakout. We could end up seeing something similar. The only difference would be it's just going to end up playing out in its own sort of way, because up to this point, this impulse, comparing it to 2017, has actually been very similar. It hasn't been as quick. It's been actually slower. It's been taking more time to actually get that impulse. But we ended up coming right in between the 236 and the 382, which is actually the exact same level that we ended up hitting here in the first impulse of 2016. So for us to have this sort of correction back down in here, leading to another impulse that would take us to the 618, that would actually behave a lot more similar to what we saw in that price action in the 2016 cycle, leading to that 2017 bull run. And so that's why I say that all we can really go off of is what our prior cycles have given us, and what we know up to this point without a given doubt has been our 4-year cycles are continuing to play out. And that's what gives me a lot of confidence that regardless of the short-term outcome of Bitcoin's price, we can continue to focus in on the long-term trend. And what we're looking at here when we're factoring in all of these different cycles, we got to look at a lot of different factors in here. Because if we're looking at the 4-year cycle, we've seen a number of different reaccumulations to begin a new cycle. And that's why I say, guys, I actually drew this in the wrong spot. And that's why I say, guys, we never know how our beginning of the new bull cycle is ever going to look, but the consistency of the trend of the bear markets and the consistency of the trend of the 4-year cycles is the thing that continues to make me bet on the long-term trend more than anything else. We can see a very obvious trend that has played out, and even inside of the last 10 years of Bitcoin's price history specifically, this trend has played out even more consistently. In the last 8 years, we've seen the exact same symmetry between time frames stacking up in the 4-year cycles, from cycle low to cycle low, equaling exactly 1,428 days. And 1,450 days is 4 years. So in the same way that we ended up bottoming here in the FTX collapse, it was exactly 1,428 days from the bottom that we saw at the bottom of our 2018 bear market. So we see these exact same correlations every time. And we know that if we go back and look at every beginning of the new bull cycle, and we come all the way back over here, we see these impulses and then these reaccumulation periods, these impulses, these reaccumulation periods, and that's what builds the foundation of support, right? Now, in 2015, we ended up taking 288 days worth of us just kind of going sideways before we ended up starting those breakouts, reaccumulation, and impulses, right? And so that's why I say that every cycle is going to be its own sort of thing, but they're always going to rhyme in their own way, and they rhyme around the 4-year cycle. And we can see that being every single cycle low to cycle low equaling almost exactly 4 years in duration. Now keep in mind, guys, that in 2019, we saw something a little different where we went through a shorter reaccumulation and a bigger breakout, but the reaccumulation that we saw to the downside was like 450 days from this top to the point of us actually breaking out of those highs again was actually 450 days. So we ended up making, where both of these would make 2 impulses and reaccumulations, we ended up making about both of those in just one big go. So that's why I say that we never truly know what every single beginning impulse is going to be. And that's why we've talked about the potential where this is our first impulse and we kind of correct back down to the 618, and then we start that next impulse, and then we might correct back down like this. And then that might lead us to that breakout in a new all-time high sometime into 2024, maybe even 2025. But that's all the cycles have ever done. It's all we ever really know, and that's all we can ever really go off of. Up to this point, because the 4-year cycles have bottomed so perfectly, so symmetrically over the last 10 plus years, that's what's given me a lot of inclination that I can continue to focus in on the big picture. And even if we do see this correction in here, for me, my sights is much more focused towards the end of 2025. It's always the end of 2025 where you see all of the narratives blow up in the biggest ways. And so you might not even end up seeing an altcoin take off until the end of that cycle. But in the end of that cycle, you might end up seeing it take off in a huge way. And that's why I say, guys, you're better off finding the narratives now, accumulating now, finding all of those really solid picks that you thoroughly believe in leading into the beginning of a cycle. Because even if we see a deeper correction, it gives us more time to research, it gives us more time to accumulate, and it gives us more time to ultimately accumulate, and it gives us more of that time to have a foundation in play for real price appreciation to the upside. I believe that this cycle is going to play out in a similar way, in the same ways that it has in all the prior cycles. The only difference here is the price action is always going to vary. We understand that. We've been through the cycles enough at this point. This is now my 3rd bull run and 7th year in crypto. So throughout my entire time in this, what we've seen up to this point has been actually more bullish price action to begin a new cycle. Even though Bitcoin, didn't quite necessarily go up as high as what we saw in 2019, we saw a lot of altcoins blow up. We saw a lot of profits that were performed by many altcoins doing, 50, 100x. And in my opinion, that was something we didn't quite see as often at the latter part, or what I should say, in the early parts of any of the last cycles. And so that's why I want you guys to understand that this is still a long-term game. And even though we're at the very beginning of this cycle, we've seen a lot of things to really look forward to. The thing that's always made me very confident in focusing in the long term has been the 4-year cycles. All the things that we've seen up to this point are pinpointing us having this cycle being a big one. I think that this cycle is going to be bigger than prior ones, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've seen more adoption in the last few years than ever before, and I think that this is going to lead to a real retail cycle top where it ends up being a euphoric blow-off top, right? And so that's kind of what I'm going to end up watching for. Now, the thing is, because the 4-year cycles continue to play out, and because the price action up to this point really hasn't varied, I'm not really going to look at it any differently. For me, what I'm targeting every correction is a 618 to 786 retest, and that's where I think that we're going to be headed if we end up seeing a deeper correction from here. 21,500 for per Bitcoin, and that's going to be a great opportunity for anybody that's ending up holding cash. But that's what I'm going to be watching out for with Bitcoin. After that, we would end up seeing another leg up in the cycle, and that's why I say that 2017 could be the direction that we end up taking in, its own sort of way, being this cycle today. The S&P 500, if we're to end up seeing this hold as support right now, then that's the only real bullish scenario that Bitcoin's going to have for us to end up holding as support, reclaiming that support, and actually going up into a final leg up. But if the S&P 500 was to break down, this resistance is once again going to hold, then I think that we could end up seeing a much deeper correction in here. And it doesn't have to go all the way down to 37.5, but a deeper correction in here could actually give the dollar the legs it needs to actually finish this wave C upwards of about 108 to 109. So that's what I'm watching for across the board. Wanted to give you guys this update. It's been a little while, been working on a lot of things, but the big thing is we haven't really broken out of the range. So there really wasn't the need for me to continue to make the exact same update every single day. But I feel like we covered a lot of things. I know that this was a really solid update full of information. So if you guys did find value in that, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. If you guys want to join the Discord server, download my free ebook, or do any of that stuff, follow all the calls that I take, follow all of my signals that I make over this cycle. Links are in the description to go ahead and sign up on my website. I appreciate you guys, and I look forward to seeing what ends up happening in the market. A lot of volatility in the market in the last couple days, which is why I wanted to jump in today's video, give you guys an all-around market update. So hopefully this answered all of your questions. If it didn't, drop one below, and I will be sure to see them as I'm going through them later today. Thank you guys so much, and with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.